Okay.
Yeah, well, let's get this going, and if anyone else shows up, I will let them in. So, evening, everybody. My name is Matt Bowes, and I'm the general manager of New West Press. And we are here tonight to celebrate the launch of Old Man's River, the new old book of poems by Sid Marty. It's a collected works going back all the way to the 60s and till right now, a bunch of new stuff in there. Um, and with me tonight, I have Sid Marty and Tom Wayman, as well as Charlie McLean from Cafe Books, who are the official bookseller for the event. I'm going to put some links in the chat where you can pick up your own copies of Sid's book as well as books by Tom Wayman. But before I get to that, I'm just going to do a land acknowledgement. So, New West Press, we're in Edmonton, Alberta. And we wish to acknowledge that the land on which we operate is Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples, including Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and Nakota Sioux.
No, I didn't do anything, Yvonne.
And mute that. Okay, we go. And then for Cafe Books in Canmore, town of Canmore is located on Treaty 7, the traditional territory and oral practices of the Stoney Nakoda, comprised of the Bearpaw First Nation, Chiniki First Nation, and Goodstoney First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai. We also acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We acknowledge all nations who live, work, and play and help us steward this land and celebrate this territory. We commit to working in right relations to advance truth and reconciliation. And now I'm going to close my window because it's raining.
No.
Okay, so the main event tonight is a conversation between Sid Marty, Tom Wayman, and the Poetic Muses. So I'll just give you a brief précis on these two men, and then I'll let them take it away. So Tom Wayman, prolific writing career includes more than 20 poetry collections, 3 collections of critical and cultural essays, 3 books of short fiction, and a novel. He won the 2013 Acorn Plantos Award for his book Dirty Snow and has been shortlisted for a Governor General's Literary Award. In 2021, he was presented with the George Woodcock Lifetime Achievement Award for contributions to BC literature. Since 1989, he's been based in the Slocan Valley in southeastern BC. And then for Sid, Sid Marty, we are celebrating tonight. Sid Marty is a poet, author, and musician based near the communities of Pincher Creek and the Crow's Nest Pass. He is the author of 5 books of poetry and 5 nonfiction works. Though best known as a nonfiction author, he began his career as a poet. His first book, Headwaters, in 1973, was published to widespread national acclaim. And over the years, he's continued to publish poems in books, school texts, anthologies, and magazines. The culmination of all that dedication to the craft so long to learn is this collection of poems right here, both published and new. So with no further ado, let's hear from Sid Marty.
Thank you very much, and hello, everybody. I see Peter Christensen's name here, and Tom Orton is there, and also Eva Radford is there, who I owe a debt of gratitude to, and Tom Radford, who I hope is working on a very special project right now that I don't know if I'm allowed to mention, but I'm wishing you well with it. So this book, it's impossible to actually give a full account of it. It's far too thick and far too long. So what I thought I'd do would be sort of move through it, try and pick something from the various eras to try and give some idea of what the scope is. So it starts out with student days in Montreal at Sir George Williams University. And the first poem is kind of, it sort of signifies where I'm probably going to be going afterwards, and terms of environmental concerns. It's called Saboteur. I found a secret tree aloof on Crescent Street, growing the asphalt roof. Frost cracked the tar, a squirrel hit a seed, and this dull daylight kindled a tree. Commando maple shooting from this black garden with a bomb in the roots. Someday this green alchemy will light a fuse with a ton of force to spiderweb the white wall. Those who doubt the power of smoky urban daylight will tumble astounded from a sudden gap like beetles, and a green crown will shimmer under a brand new sun. Excuse me 1 minute. Let me go. I want to try and keep track of the time here. Now we move forward in time to the prairies where my father's family first came as homesteaders, lured by the CPR to think they were going to make their fortune growing wheat in the sandhills of what is now the Suffield military base. Didn't work out too well. This is called tumbleweed harvest. Tumbleweed harvest under the autumn moon. See how they blow like ghosts to pile up on barbed wire fences and choke the mouths and the creaks of the coolies. Late in the year they catch the driven snow, make hills and windrows out on the bald-headed prairie. They pile up in the doorways of ruined farms. They buffet the unwary walker, harried by wind in the darkness, driving thorns through clothes which reach the skin and draw blood. As the section of the book, which is the headwater section, and it deals with early days in the mountains in the Park Warden Service. To give you an idea of how old I actually am, at that time the only communication in the backcountry was through a single bare number 9 telephone wire, and one of the duties we had was to keep this wire attached to poles, trees, stone cairns, or whatever, so that we had emergency communication in the backcountry. And woe betide the warden who didn't keep the phone line in his district working. This is called Inside the Map for Bob Haney. There is a trail into those ranges, its continuity more mapped than real. Constantly its aim is cut by swollen creeks of runoff. Burdened by snow slides, it sags downhill. The bare metal phone line is lost in a tangle of trees and mud. The voice fades, shorted through stones, filtered through roots. The twisted line breaks down. The warden there in spring must cut his way out and cut his way back in, slashing away half-thawed debris, swimming his horses through lonely streams, salvaging broken packs in the muck. Wet as a muskrat, he rolls the smoke, thinking to strike the trail on the rock slide, tightening a cinch, longing for fire. His chilled gut churns for hot coffee lashed with strong rum. 10 miles, 20 miles, Jack's Lake, Grizzly Shelter, Rocky Forks, and Men Corral. Next, shoe horses in the gumbo. Now you've earned your fire. Timber wolves howl up the valley under Mount Balcarres. Another poem from that book is this one, a poem of longing. It's called Moline Lake Poem. Dull sky at morning, I walk to the mouth of the canyon. thinking of you, of fire and water, as the dawn came up like that over the log boom, angry red on a mean river, trapping the spring adrift. Fishing, I caught no fish, empty, walked home, wet from the cold dew. May begins without you. The east where you lie is at dawn on fire. Here there is only dark water in the shadow of Mount Leah. The next collection in this book is poems from Nobody Danced with Miss Rodeo. And this is called In the Dome Car of the Canadian. The Down syndrome boy is astounded with joy at terrific white-fanged mountains. A shining makes him cry aloud. Tunnels through stone to him are mysteries, are happy as the womb, and equally happy to him, embraced by folly's equanimity, was his birth in this bright world. He claps his hand over his mouth and moans with ecstasy to be swallowed whole again, then born into the glimmering light. These boats along the Fraser, trailing their glistening sweepers of logs along the river, are arcs of all creation, rocking on the dappled water. Oh, passengers, you travelers, may strain your eyes to blindness, but never again you'll see what he is seeing as he dances in the aisles for joy. This poem is from Sky Humor, from a section called Coyote Shivery, and the poem is called Mountains. To live here is to know these jagged arcs of glory are at war with gravity, that spent footfalls of giant lives still echo among Earth's frozen blue pavilions, the heaped up sharpened bones, prehistory, and blood, though petrified, is singing in the stone. Under our feet, the raised beds of ancient seas remind us that we only came here yesterday. What gives us our dominion, and yet we soar and follow with the mind anything the eye can cover, until we think the eye can take in time. And the last thing we discover is humility in the small, white-petaled anemone below the swooning ice-carved tower. Seeing in that green kiss, what power to take this measure that will take us everywhere. From that same collection is this poem called The Amulet, and it's imaginary archaeologist. The amulet. It might have been the child's. We found her broken skeleton buried near that pile of bison bones. Back before the bow, they were buried sitting up, as if in waiting. We don't know for what. A child already had survived so much, and then swept over the Peacecoon's edge, drowning in the buffalo, or so it seems. Was it for love they carved such things? We can't know what love was like then. There was hunger, fear, and pain, all of the ugly surprises. Oh, we could find those models still. But love's not my department. I'm just a kind of miner whittling off the ages with a grapefruit knife. No hope of finding gods this amulet might appease. What need for gods now with the grass plowed under? Winter was real then, not a dream behind glass. Not much time to moon for love or mourn. Yes, well, maybe after the hides were softened and the winter camp attained, down on the river bottom where there was firewood, after the stories had been told, too dark to ply the needle, too bright by moonlight yet to sleep. The prairie wolves gone hunting elsewhere, the Great Plains grizzly gone to den. Maybe then, over a lock of hair kept in a skin bag, or a piece of willow some hand had whittled hurriedly to a doll, maybe then there was time for tears of amazement, and maybe, see what you've got me doing? Well, maybe love began in bewilderment, with a shoulder suffer there to cling to, and a harsh voice saying one soft word. My wife is a consummate gardener. She supplies the mysteries and the planning and the intelligence. I supply the muscle. But I grieve for her sometimes because we get frost here. Oh, we'll get it sometimes 3 times in a summer on the worst summers, despite the heat. This is called sunflowers. All summer the sunflowers rose to the sun's hard music, rose like fiery-headed serpents out of the garden bed. All day long they worshipped, and the heat rolled over them like honey. Every night they bent their crowns together to talk about the sun, turning their backs on the moon. The one no man can walk upon, the one that watches sunflowers sleep. One night in August, she sent the frost creeping along their green necks. Come morning they were stooped low, still doing homage to the night. A bee caught sleeping in the yellow florets barely moved a wing as the sun came up. The thawing tresses dripped their colors, but the sun kept moving under the moon's half-opened eye. They are black and done now, those golden faces, always leaning over the pasture fence to greet the visitor. This is a winter country, sighs the moon, the golden harvest moon over the ruined garden. This is the shortest poem in the book. It's called Heartwood. So much deadwood in the willow, yet from the knotted fist of heartwood springs the supple bough. You have to have 1 or 2 poems about the literary life. This is one of them. It's called Ballad of the Onion. It's for an editor briefly encountered. At lunch we ordered salad, serene and spare of build. She gazed upon the legumes while her water glass was filled. But she edited the onions like unwanted exclamations from the paragraphs of lettuce and the carrots' explications. She asked to see some poems. I read for her that night. The verses stripped me naked. I was blinded by her light. But she left the crowded room with a speed that seemed rehearsed. It must have been the onion stinking up the verse. A letter came today. Her writing is so neat. Reminds me of the way she nibbles vegetables sans meat. She sent me back the poems, Try again someday. We only use postmodern, and rhyming is passé. I still can smell the perfume of this literary seer who'd condescend to smile when she'd prefer to sneer. Her pearly teeth, her crimson nails, once pierced me to the core. But many a beast that chews a leaf has the heart of a carnivore. And on the theme of the so-called literary life, I have a few friends who thought they could make a living writing poems. Nobody makes a living writing poems that I know of. Well, I guess Rod McEwen did, you know. Leonard Cohen didn't. Another Blue Guitar, it's called. I now begin to sing my way west, the prairie poet said. Collect. Going to sing my way across the plains and meet you at John White's funeral. So little money in Saskatchewan that winter day for a busker poet of the frozen song lines, strumming the icicles on the depot wall, or that cracked guitar the frost had stuck its tongue in. Blue-fingered, he would sing the blues to terrified commuters, wail frost-bitten winos out of alleys, and dance them reeling into sad cafes. Oh, but he's a legend of canned poetry. The professors are waiting to be sure the singing's over so they can decide how famous he will be. They loved his rags and feathers, they loved how he rang the suicide changes, but oh, how they hate a poet that sings. I now begin to sing my way west, he said, to those who loved him in vain. I'll call you from Medicine Hat if I get that far, if I come that close to the mountains. If someone out there sends me a ticket, stamp it alcoholic one way only, as they do. And I'll sing all the way to Calgary and Banff. I'll sing at the funeral do. And I promise not to drink my ticket away, away. Yeah, promise not to drink my ticket away. I dreamt he died and woke up to his voice howling a banshee's dirge on the CBC. And after that, a terrible silence. I tracked him to a halfway house in a prairie town. He smiles, he sleeps, his voice grows weak, and he who lived for poetry can write no more. Drugs and shrinks can't rescue him. He's waiting for something, and before it comes, I think perhaps only a princess could save him now. Only a princess could rouse him with a kiss, to then kick free of the frozen mud of despair, and rising, pour his love again into our willful, disbelieving ears.
All right, do we want to go to our conversation for a bit now with Tom?
Well, it's been about 17 minutes. I could read maybe one more,
Okay.
if that's okay.
I think that sounds perfect.
Okay. So this one is a new poem from the part of the book that's been unpublished previously, or published but not published in books. And this is called Poem from Mary, a Reader. You said my mountain books lifted you from your wheelchair, gypsy free from your wasted legs. So that was you, Mary, with us on the lightning-shattered rock of Mount Victoria, breathing in the sulphurous smell of crumbling limestone, drunk on the moist air rising up from the milky emerald mouth of Lake Oasa. You must have slipped under my climbing harness, and as I bent to drink from a brook, so light you were and unperceived. even straddling that sickle of a cornice between South and Center Peak, where space licks at your ankles like an invisible wolf. I'm glad you were there, Mary, because my knees won't take me much higher now, and your husband says you finally left that wheelchair behind. Your words of praise were an amulet against despair that no one saw in me, especially you. So let's go climb the ridge behind the house, follow the mule deer up through the twisted bull pine for the first time this spring. Just 6,000 feet is all, but high enough to stare into another country. I'll show you the square north face of Chief Mountain, Montana. We'll picture it guiding those Blackfoot warriors raiding south all the way from Rupert's Land to Yellowstone. Not so long ago, Mary. Today, this outlier of the Lewis overthrust will wrap us up step by step into the Eagle's Hall. The faithful crocuses of spring break my crazy heart with their obeisance to our climate-deranged sun. Any bird still moving after the last new normal snow of May is bragging now to wit to woo and drilling through the ice cap for the thawing worm. And Mary, I am always glad to know while I draw breath, you'll keep invisible company, skipping ahead sometimes in your dreams, or turn the page and rest, leaning on my shoulder, lighter upon me now than a crocus petal smile. Thanks for your attention to the poems.
That was great. Thank you, Sid.
No, you're very
I've
glad
got,
to read.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just glad to read to people. It's great.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to get to do these things again.
Yeah.
I've got a link to Cafe Books if you want to pick up your copy of Old Man's River. So just check in the chat. But for now, I'm going to introduce Tom Wayman, who's going to speak with Sid about the poetic life. So welcome to the stage, Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was really excited to read the book. There was like old favorites of mine, and then things I'd never seen. So it was just a wonderful, wonderful read. One extra surprise for me was how the book ends with the poem "The Greeting," which is set in Nelson, which is the nearest town in British Columbia where I live. And in the poem, you come into a used bookstore, and there displayed is a first edition copy of Men for the Mountains. And I thought it was a wonderful way to end the book. It's like ends and beginnings, round and round.
Yeah,
kind of like
thank you.
a grand and fabulous.
I was completely startled by that, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
It was Packrat Annie's books,
Yes.
and they had no idea I was coming or anything. It was just, they've had this edition, and there it was. Yeah, I was amazed.
And when we're talking about the idea of a used bookstore, it raises that question of audience, and that's the first kind of area I want to get your thoughts on. In the book at the end, there's a very good interview with you by Pamela Banting from University of Calgary. And in that interview, you mentioned that the people you write about, and you quote them saying, working people, farmers and ranchers, seldom, if ever, read poetry, or at least poetry of what you call lasting literary value. Also in the book, along those lines, is your poem, "The Statue of Al Purdy," which includes an incident when your wife Myrna was running the cafe in Pincher Creek, and Purdy was there. And in the poem, Myrna gets quite upset because no one in the cafe had ever heard of Al Purdy.
Yeah, I got upset too.
And then just generally, your poems are set in the rural, which is where only 20% of Canadians live, and which the urban, where most of the significant national media and cultural institutions are located. They're just not interested very much in what goes on in the rural. There was a time when academia was interested in a broad number of issues that affect Canadian literature. Now it seems to me anyway, it's narrowed down to issues of race and gender and competing victimhood. And these are not things that you deal with at all. So it seems to me it's unlikely that your poems get brought very, very often to a student audience. And
Yeah.
Though your poems are quite magnificent in how they deal with the environment and people's relation with the environment for good or bad, they don't read like with the kind of scolding and preaching that we expect from these days from environmental literature. So again,
Yeah.
there seems an audience that you're not talking to. So my question is, how important to your writing is your sense of audience? Do you have a sense of who you are speaking to?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm really unfortunate that you asked that question. That's so hard to answer. In one, okay, let's back up a little bit. I've been writing ever since I started about one group of oppressed people, and that's Indigenous people. But leaving that aside, one thing I'm trying to do is convert the people that read my nonfiction books to buy my poetry books. It's just I'm hoping that a lot of them might decide to pick them up. You mainly hear from the readership that, oh, I don't like poetry. Oh, poetry's not for me. And they got turned off of poetry at a young age, and I guess one of my ambitions is to try and turn them back on, if I could, by writing poems that are accessible. I think they're all accessible, basically, and but you, not to kowtow to the perception of the readers not being capable to handle literary work. I mean, there's no point in doing that. You want to write stuff that has lasting value, but at the same time, you really would like it if people would read it. I'm not writing this stuff to read it to myself in a room, late at night. So, yeah, but it's difficult. And I think, my friend, that you have the the same problem. It's funny you should ask me that question, because you've got anthologies of work poems about the working life of the working man and the working woman. And who's reading that stuff? I hope that a lot of people are reading it, but I have a doubt or two.
But before we leave this topic, like, do you have a sense of who you speak to? I mean, I understand the thing about trying to broaden and deepen the audience for poetry.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, there's no question that's a great goal. But right now, like when you're sitting there writing a poem, do you have a sense that who you're talking to? Because like you say, you're not doing it for yourself.
Yeah. No, I don't think I do. And I should moderate one statement. I said that maybe people in the ranching life wouldn't be interested in this stuff. But two of the best poets I know, Paul Zarzycki, was the poet laureate of Montana, and Paul is regarded as a cowboy poet. But I would suggest that him and another guy, Doffelmeyer is his last name. His first name's eluding me right now. These guys are working cowboys and working ranchers, but they're writing poetry of lasting literary value. I mean, and they're welcomed at Elko at the National Cowboy Poetry Festival, and their stuff is going right over the heads of a lot of the people there. But because they're in the life and they're authentic, people are willing to listen. So I guess I'm kind of hoping that people will give me a chance, and we'll pick up this book and we'll listen or read the poems. And a lot of the people in Pincher Creek the other night, where we had a book launch, some of those folks don't read poetry books as a rule, but they some of them bought my book, so there's hope.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the fact that, yeah, you said there were like 40 people at the Pincher Creek reading, which is pretty good for a small town anywhere. But so it's got to include folks that wouldn't ordinarily be there.
Well, it would have been bigger, but the local rag, which is called Shootin' the Breeze, forgot to put the press release in the paper. So a lot of people didn't know about the event. Then they sent me a letter afterwards apologizing. Oh, sorry, it wound up in our spam folder. So I think there would have been more.
I'm just gonna ask you a kind of a somewhat related question, which is, as well as in Old Man River, that really quite interesting interview with you by Pamela Banting that ends the book. There's an introduction to the book by a couple of University of Calgary scholars. Well, one of them, Owen Percy, is now at Sheridan.
Yeah, Kit Dobson was the editor of this work. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Owen Percy.
And they come around to the issue of what they call the practice of environmental and social stewardship. And they quote you from the introduction to one of your prose books, Switchbacks, as saying, quote, "Artists who love the land must continually strive to change public opinion." And you go on to say more or less what you mean by changing public opinion is to revere the land rather than just see it as mostly a place to make money. And I guess my question is there something that poetry can do to change public opinion that journalism or environmental writing or nonfiction writing generally can't do? Is there some energy or aspect of poetry that has in some way more leverage to change people's minds than those other forms of writing? Or is it just, one more genre that, you can use?
I think the emotional quotient of poetry is something that can influence people, and the musical language and the emotional quotient of poetry can do things that prose can't always do. And one of the things that reviewers have said about my prose is it's very poetic. And I can't help that, doing that or writing that way. And it seems to be one of the things about my prose books that people really respond to, although they may not buy my poetry books. So, I mean, what can I tell you? I think that it goes back to what I said about somehow making poetry accessible. People can't be moved or persuaded by it unless they will pick it up and read it, unless they think that it's something they can understand and respond to. So how do we do that? That's the challenge.
But so you're saying that like the emotional content of your poems is a lever to get people more interested or change their mind?
Yeah, rather than beating them over the head with "Oh, you bad person driving your SUV" or whatever, people just turn off when you go after them with verbal cudgels. Yes. So you need to persuade them. Yeah, you have to influence them. You have to move them.
Yeah, well,
because their instinct is not to, as has been said, I think by the writer Upton Sinclair, that you can't convince a man to do something when doing it would go against his economic interests, or words to that effect. So yeah.
Okay, one of the things about the book, just leaving the question of audience aside, that I was really impressed with was just the range of your responses to the natural world. I was really happy that you speak so eloquently about the kind of hits of beauty that you get by living in the rural. I think poems like April Night, Boundary Slough, or There Was a Man, both of which deal with what, like, I live in a rural area too, and every day there's like something beautiful that you see, and that the people around us, whatever their politics, can be very, very generous, very strong and generous, and you capture it in that kind of poems. And at the same time, you've got poems about kind of the dark side of living and working in the rural. Think of poems like Crippled on the Highway, where as a warden you have to track down and shoot an animal that's been hit by a car or other vehicle.
Yeah, many times. Yeah.
Or a poem like Meat for the Winter, where you're hunting an elk in order to feed a family, and all the kind of emotions that get churned up.
Mhm.
And then besides these kind of narrative poems, you have poems in this book that go quite deep emotionally, I would say. I think of poems like The Wound, which is to me just a stunning little gem of a poem about emotional scarring, or a poem like Deer Along the Moye, where you end the poem with a evocative image for me of what you call the deer's last wilderness and ours, the dark. It just quite resonant. So my question is, how do you decide how deep to go in a poem, whether the occasion for it is an event or an object in nature or an interaction with family or other people? Like, you can do a kind of surface account, or you can go deeper. How do you decide sort of how Bob Dylan used to say, how far in do you want to go? And that's my question to you. How do you decide?
Well, I may be making assumptions, Tom, but I think you very well know the answer to that. You go where the poem takes you. If the poem is taking you deep, then you go deep. These things are not necessarily under our control. And many a famous songwriter has been asked about their process and has responded, I don't want to talk about it. It's magic, and I don't want to talk about it. It's something that I have that happens to me, and I don't want it to ever stop. And I don't want to evaluate it, to understand it, to deconstruct it. I just want it to continue. I sort of feel that way too. Yeah.
So
there is a mystery involved.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, don't you agree? Don't you agree?
Well, I don't like that phrase, the idea that the poem will tell me where to go, because
Okay.
I don't quite know what that means. I mean, I understand the thing if you don't want to talk about process, but it's just that seems to evade the question. How does the poem talk to you?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's where the emotional component comes in. I feel sometimes that I'm being taken over by something that wants me to go in a certain direction, and if I don't go in that direction, oftentimes the poem doesn't work. It gets it gets caught up in didacticism or explication or whatever the hell, and it's not working. And some of these poems, I don't even understand them. I talked about accessibility, but it's true that sometimes I don't quite understand where they came from or completely what's being said, and yet I know that they're truthful and powerful, and so I don't want to tamper with them. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that cheese you off?
No, that's better. That's much better than the other way. I can go on to another question, but it's 6:45, so I'll just check with Matt. Did you want to open it up for questions, or should I keep going?
Well, let's just see if anyone in the audience has something to ask both of you about. So if you got a question for Sid and Tom, just put it in the chat and I'll read it out rather than us having to all fiddle with our mute and etc. So yeah, if you got a burning question to ask these guys, let me know right now. And if not, we'll get Tom to talk a little bit more. So 30-second warning. If you are just, amazed by the sheer poetic talent on display, that's good too.
I should point out at this point that the first version of this manuscript was sent to Tom Wayman here to be evaluated by him, because I completely trust his judgment, despite the fact that we're having a disagreement about some issue or other. And although I didn't completely agree with all of his selections, I really appreciated the fact that he had read the whole thing and made suggestions, which was very helpful. So
Great.
Thank you publicly for your role in this book.
Well, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Oh, we got a question here from another Tom, Thomas Wharton. Tom says, Sid, you're also a songwriter. Do your poems ever become songs, or do your songs become poems? What's the interlink there?
Yeah. There's a few poems in this book that have turned into songs. Some of them just the lyric has been unchanged and it's gone on into a musical form. Others I found, well, this is a really good poem and potentially a good lyric, but it's not quite working as a lyric without some revision. So I've actually revised the poem slightly so that it works as a lyric. I've done that with a few of them. Yeah.
What's the hallmark of a poem that would make a good song?
Well, I've got a poem that goes, sleep under my shoulder like a deer below a hill. I would be stronger for you still. I'd be sun-heated stone if I could. And I took that and I thought, well, that's going to work. And I got the guitar going and I created a melody that goes, sleep under my shoulder, love, like a deer below a hill. I would be stronger for you still. I'd be sun-heated stone if I could. Sleep against my shoulder, love. Sleep against my shoulder, love. And it goes on, of course. And without hearing the guitar, it's kind of hard to represent it. But it seemed to just flow into a musical lyric.
So like we
Yeah.
like we talked about when we were doing a podcast, it's you can't bifurcate your brain into nonfiction mode or poetry mode, and I guess music mode is still in there all the time too.
Yeah, I like to play some of my songs when I do a reading. Like I'm going to be reading at the Alpine Club in Edmonton next week, and I'm going to take a guitar or two along for that event and play some songs because poetry and music are very close together for me. They seem to merge into each other. Prose is somewhat different, mainly because I've had to write prose for a living. So therefore, there's a very utilitarian approach to prose at times, which is not the case with poetry and songs.
Do you ever make a song from prose though, like the Mad Trapper guy, or?
No, I don't think I've done that really. Not that I can remember anyway.
It still needs to be somewhat poetic, and then you can kind of make the shift between, eh?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Interesting. Thea has more of a comment than a question, but she says it's lovely to hear your singing voice, and I agree.
Oh, thank you. I'm not singing very well right now, but I can do better than that.
That's better than I could do on my best day. So there you go. Any more questions for Sid? If not, maybe Tom, do you have one to go out on? Or?
Yeah. Okay, so people that study dreams say that every figure in a dream is an aspect of ourselves, and there's ways in which poems are like dreams. So one poem of yours that I used to steadily teach when I taught is the poem "I'm So Lonesome in the Saddle Since My Horse Died," which, despite the humor of the title and the incidents in the poem, is actually quite a touching kind of simultaneous portrait of two people, the teller of the tale and the cowhand, the person he's describing.
Yeah.
The speaker says of the cowhand, and this is where I'm going with this question. Speaker says of the cowhand, who's the subject of the poem, quote, "He was born too late, you see, for the time he was living." And so my question, I'm going to expand a little bit, is do you think you're living in the wrong century? And I ask because, the 21st century isn't doing real well with the issues that you raise in the poems about people make a living from the land and the land itself and how we use it. And you have a genuine feeling for the land and its people, which is a long way from, the kind of virtue signaling and, proclaiming victimhood and all that stuff that seems to be part of the environmental movement. So politics aside, I guess if I had to sum up the question is, do you feel at home in 21st century Alberta, there at the eastern edge of the Crow's Nest Pass?
Well, sometimes I do, but when I'm confronted with people running ATVs through spawning beds of the threatened West Slope cutthroat trout, no, I don't feel at home. And then at the same time, these same guys that do this stupid shit, if you broke down on the side of the road, they'd be the first people to stop and help you out. Because there's a joke about Saskatchewan, and the guy says, if you break down in rural Saskatchewan, do not call a tow truck. In about 20 minutes, 3 guys in the cab of a Ford pickup will show up with a tow chain and a winch, and they will pull you out. These guys live for this, you know. There's a certain amount of truth in that, because I've learned to be like that in the rural setting, to help people out. So there's that whole thing about helping your neighbors out, and yet the politics are hard to cope with at times. Yeah. So I don't know. I when I worked in the mountains, I worked on horseback for 6 months, 7 months, sometimes, yes, about 7 months of the year. And in that life, I traveled with saddle horses and pack horses, and that was like being back in the 1880s. The minute you left the highway behind, you seemed to leave everything behind. And I was really happy with that. And except I missed my family, and eventually I got a little bit too Western because I was away too much. So, but while it lasted, it was great. So I can cope in that kind of environment. I can cope with wood burning stoves and living off the land and all the rest of it. But this is a century that I have to learn to live in, so I'm doing the best I can with it.
Well, the poems certainly seem at home there. That's the thing. Like when you read the book, it feels settled into the landscape. And
yeah.
And that's why I was curious whether, despite all this other stuff, whether you still, you feel as settled in as the poems do, if you like.
I would say so, basically. Yeah, I would say so. I don't spend as much time fighting all these issues anymore, because they take up too much of your time. And,
right. You guys bought the Oldman River Dam, and then sour gas wells and the whale factors.
Yeah.
Like you have been.
And clear-cut logging, and this is just one damn thing after another.
Right.
Constantly fighting a government that has all kinds of employees who are well paid to protect the environment, and probably would protect the environment if they were given a chance, but they're not. They're reined in constantly by their political masters. So we are constantly on the fight, trying to get them to do what they're supposed to do.
But it's just in your writing, and I'd say in the music too. Somehow you, that kind of strife and anger and stuff, it isn't there as much as a kind of love for the landscape, and despite everything. And so that's what I was trying to get at. Like even say a song like "Let the River Run," which is just a beautiful song. I mean, it's about opposition to the Oldman River Dam, but the song itself is pretty gorgeous, and the poems too. They don't scold, they don't lecture. There's a kind of rootedness, or as like I keep coming back to that, as if you were at home, and this other stuff just goes.
Yeah, Let the River Run in particular. That's informed really by Blackfoot mythology in essence.
Right.
So it's about Old Man in a way, the creator trickster figure in of old, who's very much a presence for me, even as a white man. Um, he's very important to me as a mythological or historical figure, even though I'm not part of that culture.
Yeah, well, I mean, the book is called Old Man's River.
Oh
so-
yeah, that's right. Thanks for reminding
I hate to remind you, but
There we go. Thank you, Tom, for keeping our eyes on the prize. The book is called Old Man's River.
He's very good at keeping you on the ball.
I've got one last comment here, just from Elizabeth M. She says, "This was marvelous. Having grown up in rural southern Alberta, the prairie poems really resonated with me. I sank right into them." So there you go.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Well, there's lots more of them in this book.
Yeah, pound for pound, this is a really good deal for poems. Lots
Yeah,
of them.
pound for pound. I must be about 2 pounds, isn't it?
It's about there.
I haven't weighed it.
Well, we're coming up on 8 o'clock, so if anyone's got any last minute questions, throw them in there. Otherwise, I
And
think
thank you to Tom and Eva Radford again for believing in me over the years and helping out when they could.
yeah. Tom Wharton says thank you, marvelous again. So yeah, and thank you, Tom, and thank you, Cafe Books. Just I think this is a nice
Thank you,
evening.
Cafe Books. Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having us involved.
Yeah. Links in the chat there to pick up Sid's book as well as Tom's work. It's all in there. Thea wants to know when the reading at the Alpine Club is.
That's on the 17th. It's at a store called, if I get this pronounced this right, Fjall Raven. I don't know whether it's it's a Scandinavian name, I guess. Fjall Raven. FJALLRAVEN with a whole bunch of umlauts.
Yeah. I think that's in the brewery district here.
Yeah, it's at 7. Yeah, you'd know where it is, Matt. It's at 7 p.m.
Yeah.
It's the Alpine Club. It's sort of members and guests, but I guess you'd contact the Alpine Club about that. I'm not sure how that would work.
I'm not going to hold you off with pitons like, get out of here.
I don't think they would, but don't speak for the Alpine Club. So
yeah, so thanks everyone for coming. Thank you to our bookstore, our readers, and Tom. Thanks everybody. It's a wonderful evening, and yeah, but check out the book, Old Man's River. It's great stuff. So yeah, thanks again, Sid, for writing it and for treating us to a reading.
Okay, guys, have a good evening.
Yeah, see you later.